Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining this Friday webinar. Today is a slightly different approach to what we usually take, where instead of doing a land app demo, today we're going to be running a Q&A session with some industry experts who I will introduce in a moment. Before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping at the start. As usual, this is a webinar, which means your camera and microphone will remain off for the duration of the webinar. But as this is a Q&A session, we'd love to hear from you right from the start, and you can ask any questions you like using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. During the webinar, we will be posing the questions to the various members of the panel, but you also can upvote questions in the Q&A function. So do keep an eye on it. And if there's any particular questions that you see that resonate with yourself, please do vote them up. The session is being recorded, so we'll be hosting it on our YouTube channel once we've finished. So hopefully by Monday or Tuesday next week, we'll get it up online. Finally, as usual, we've got a feedback form at the end of the webinar. So when you leave, either at the end or if you need to shoot beforehand, not a problem. Please just take 30 seconds to fill out that very short form because it helps inform these webinars as we move forward. So today I'll be joined by three experts from the field. We've got Jonathan Marsden from Defra, who's the head of content and sustainable farming incentive and Countryside Stewardship. We've got Jake Fiennes, the conservationist and author, and also farmer at Holkham Estate. And we've got Charlie Ennals, the relationship manager for Wildfarmed, as well as the facilitator for the Norfolk Coastal Group. And I will be chairing the session today. I'm one of the directors at Land App, and I'm here to learn as much as you. So I'm really keen to have a discussion with these three panelists as we go through the process. Just before we come round and do formal introductions, there are a number of other webinars, some of similar format, others more Land App focused on our YouTube channel. So if you go onto YouTube and type in Land App, you will be able to find them. Share my screen and want to welcome our panelists to the table. And I'm just going to do a quick round robin, if that's okay, for you to introduce yourself, your position and your relationship with Countryside Stewardship, starting with Jake.
Good afternoon. Jake Fiennes, Director of Conservation, Holkham Estate. Been at Holkham for 5 years. I have a 30-year career in land management, and I go back as far as before Countryside Stewardship, there was something which was environmentally sensitive area payment schemes, which was the sort of birth of agri-environment. So I've seen the many different guises of this reinventing something on how we make space for nature, make our farming systems more resilient, our water cleaner and our air fresher.
Jake, and it's good to have your experience on the call. Next, Charlie.
Hi, yeah, I'm Charlie Ennals. So I wear a few hats. I work for Wildfarmed, which is a regenerative food and farming business, which provides a route to market for cereals grown in line with our regen standards. So I'm agricultural relationships manager for Wildfarmed, looking after our grower community in the north and the east of England. I also am a freelance farm environment consultant, advising farmers on Countryside Stewardship and SFI, as well as facilitating the North Norfolk Coastal Group with a couple of colleagues. I've been involved with Countryside Stewardship since its inception, so I've submitted many applications over the years.
Thank you, Charlie. And finally, Jonathan.
Thank you, Dan, and good afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here speaking to so many of you. Yeah, my name is Jonathan Marsden. I wear many hats. I'm working Defra, where I lead the team that develop the content, i.e. the actions, the things we're going to pay land managers to do for both SFI and Countryside Stewardship. We're also farmers at home in the Peak District with a small dairy herd and young stock. And like Jake, actually, I started out on all of this way back when we'd got ESAs, and with MAF, as it was in the day, inherited the first version of Countryside Stewardship from the Countryside Commission, where it had been a pilot. So that's me, and back to you, Dan.
Thank you so much. And yeah, hopefully you can all see in the audience the diversity of expertise we've got on the panel. So please do start using that Q&A function if there's anything you want me to ask the panel. But I have prepared a couple of questions and also had some questions submitted before through our survey form. Charlie, I'd like to start with you if that's okay. I just want to look at the previous stewardships you've gone and just ask you, what are the particular elements you'd like to celebrate? What were the either options or processes that you've gone through that you think have gone really well?
Yeah, I mean, there's many. It's really encouraging to have worked with so many farmers that are so keen to do more for the environment on their farm. Some of the more basic options that are widespread across the countryside are so beneficial. But I think there's obviously been challenges with countryside stewardship since its inception. It's always going to be a tricky thing to create a scheme that works for everybody. But I think something that really does need to be celebrated more so than individual options is the level of uptake and how it's really being driven by the farmers themselves. Farmers are now able to integrate conservation measures into their everyday farming, not just around the edges. And yeah, I think that's such a positive thing, and we need more of that.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Completely agree. And I'm wondering whether Jake, with your, I suppose, farming hat on, would you agree with Charlie in that sense? Do you see the stewardship schemes over the time since you've been working with it helping support more regen ag practices or productivity practices as well?
So undoubtedly the latest rollout, if I look at SFI 24 and possibly SFI 23, where there is been a more focus on sustainable farming practices. So the options of reduced tillage, the payment rates for cover crops, no insecticides, some really basics of better agricultural practices. Many farmers already undertaking this are now being rewarded for it, and that then brings a sort of watershed of others to start to implement the same practices. And having this happen at a landscape scale will undoubtedly have benefits as it's further rolled out. So it's great to see significant uptake of farmers recognizing the value, well, the increase in the value in the payment rates that were announced in January. And I think at the last I heard, it was 10,000 plus live agreements. Jonathan will probably be able to update us further to where we are.
Yeah, I can do that.
But it is encouraging that actually good environmental food production is being recognised, and I think we must celebrate that. But we also must recognise that actually the value of those that have already gone into environmental endeavours and being recognised for their past work as well as their future endeavours. So it's everything that I've been championing for decades is actually slowly coming to fruition. So it's positive, and I'm optimistically cautious that it will be rolled out bigger and better and will benefit a range of farm businesses across the country.
Completely agree, Jake. And I think, traditionally they were seen in two separate camps, food production and nature. And what's great is the integration of this agroecological thought and mindset. And yeah, Jonathan, I've been really keen to hear your, views of how things have developed since you first started, but also, as Jake mentioned, a bit of a general update on progress from Defra would be really, really great.
Yeah, more than happy to do that. I mean, I think just, I suppose, to reiterate what's been said, we were one of the first countries in the world to start this whole agri-environment thinking with ESAs. And in those early days, it was very much about, and the term we often used within the industry and within conservation was making space for nature. And a lot of those early schemes, it was about taking areas out of production or creating habitats to provide what nature, if you like, needs. Over the years, we've moved more into the space of sustainable food production, but on a relatively limited basis. So in Countryside Stewardship at the moment, there's been winter cover crop actions, for example. The really big step change is now with SFI, where because actually we can now afford to do both. We need to create those habitats. We need to manage wetlands and species-rich grasslands, for example. But if we're going to get anywhere near our environmental targets, we also need to move agricultural production onto a more sustainable footing. I'll come to the figures in a moment. How I characterize this is, if we go back 80 years to that post-war period, where, let's not forget, in the 1950s, we still had food rationing in this country. And in the Netherlands in the 1950s, there were people starving to death. And as a country, as a government at the time, as a society, we responded to that by putting incentives in place, putting support in place, just to produce more food. Before we went into the EU, there were deficiency payments, etc. When we went into the EU, there were intervention support for commodities. There were advice programs, there were grants for ripping out hedgerows and levelling ridge and furrow and draining wetlands, because all we wanted was food. And that really, really worked at producing food. But that came at a huge cost to the natural environment. The challenge we have now with the Farming and Countryside programme in Defra is to produce all that great quality food, but to do it in a sustainable way, to move the dial. The challenge now is not just food, it's food that also delivers us better water quality, more biodiversity, less pesticides in our watercourses, etc., etc. And SFI and stewardship, the two together, we can move that dial. We can once again lead the world in a new direction for agricultural production that is now on a more sustainable footing. So in terms of some numbers, we've now over 15,000 applications for SFI. It might have ticked over to over 15.5 today, which is fantastic going. We are chuffed to bits with that. In terms of uptake of some of the actions, so nil insecticide on arable land, over 400,000 hectares of that. We will be getting close by the end of the month to 500,000 hectares of arable land not getting an insecticide, hopefully. Winter cover crops, 116,000 hectares of winter cover crops. Companion cropping, which is quite novel, new and niche, 89,000 hectares of companion cropping. Herbal lays, which are a really good alternative to that traditional ryegrass and 250 kilos of ammonium nitrate. Herbal lays offer a real alternative to that, 172,000 hectares of herbal lays. So what I take from that is there's a real appetite from the industry for change and to move on to a sustainable footing. What we need to do as government is provide those right incentives, the right support to enable people and farmers to respond to those new challenges.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. And, it is inspiring to hear those figures. That's, it'd be good to have from Defra if possible, and I'm sure your marketing team are working on it, some form of summary just for us to put through our network and celebrate those things. And I think you mentioned a key point there that I just want to pick up on is on the support element. You said there's some novel approaches that are coming through. I suppose, where does Defra see farm advice playing a role, and how do they facilitate and see themselves helping that element?
So There's a huge role for the advisor community in all of this. By and large, the actions that we develop fall into two camps. There are the more straightforward, the more simple, which by and large end up in the SFI area of the scheme. And really, we're looking for the commercial advisory sector to support the industry in the rollout of those. There are one or two exceptions to that. And also, we've got programs like catchment sensitive farming, which is now a national, it's not just in priority catchments anymore. If we've not already in the near future, we should have catchment officers in every catchment, and they play a really important role in supporting the rollout of SFI in the same way they have mid-tier, and where it's appropriate, where they've got their high priority farms, they will perhaps engage a little bit more fully in terms of steering people towards particular types of action. Then the more complex actions, particularly where we're managing quite intricate habitats, by and large, they will in the future fall into the auspices of Countryside Stewardship, where they get those options, and customers get the support through our arm's length bodies, whether it's Natural England, Forestry Commission, and there may well be a slightly bigger role for the Environment Agency going forward with some of the, particularly where we're playing about with water levels and things like that. So that's the broad scope. There are, in addition to that, we're continuing to support facilitated groups, facilitation fund, where groups of farmers can come together, form a farmer cluster, get some support for that facilitation and support for events. But we very much want that to be a sort of bottom-up approach. It's for those groups to come together themselves, develop their own, their own objectives, what areas they want to focus on, and then work with their facilitator to help make that happen.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Charlie, I'd like to bring you in on that. And I think there's kind of two questions. It's one, Jonathan mentioned, looking at I suppose the private or the consultancies to support with that advice. Do you feel like the sector's ready to help this massive transition? And then more from a personal level, do you feel like there's enough tools and support from Defra or from potential private finance to support the farmers in getting access to that advice?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated one, and with consultancy, there's loads of opportunity for young people that want to come into the industry, but I feel like there's probably not enough of an obvious route into this work. Yeah, and I think there's not enough of us, basically. So any way that Defra can help upskill advisors or bring in more advisors would be gratefully received. And I think actually particularly with the facilitation funds, because it's all very well a group of farmers coming together, but if they don't have a person that either has the time or the skills to facilitate a group, it's never going to get past that sort of initial stage. So I think that's really important to bring in more opportunity for those types of people, yeah, to champion farming as well. Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
At a personal level, how have you, I suppose, got support? I know you're working for Wildfarmed. Do you see that farmers are willing, for example, to pay for your time, or are they seeking funding through facilitation funds?
Yeah, I mean, I think farmers have got quite used to paying for advisors' time, whether it's their land agent or somebody with like an environmental specialism. Yeah, so I do feel like farmers are happy to pay. I suppose it depends on the farm you're speaking to. If it's a large estate or just a large farm, then it's much easier for them. So maybe there needs to be a bit more help for the smaller farms, which often have some of the more sensitive habitats. Yeah, so I think a hybrid approach with free advice available, and there is certain bits of free advice available from Defra. I think that's really important to keep that going. And I think from an advisor's perspective, having some some more backup from the RPA would be really helpful, particularly when you're kind of working alone as an advisor. You know, that everyone knows challenges that with the RPA and getting advice. Sometimes you can speak to people that are brilliant and they answer your questions and you know, follow up quickly, but other times you just, you know, your question never gets answered and you're kind of left in the dark. So I think some kind of, I don't know, whether it's a forum or just an easier way to get information backwards and forwards from RPA through to advisors would be really helpful, and actually it would end up saving farmers money because it would take up less of our time.
Thanks, Charlie. And Jake, I suppose from your perspective, when they first released Sustainable Farm Incentive, they wanted, you know, advice to not be necessary. Do you feel like advice is needed for a practical application to an SFI or a stewardship, or do you believe that there's farmers out there that can take themselves through it without requiring advice?
So the bizarre thing is, when we had incentives, environmental incentives that were prescriptive, and the frustration from the land farmers, land managers being frustrated by those prescriptions, Defra have listened and gone, okay, we'll make them less prescriptive, to the point that farmers are going, well, we don't know what to do because they're not telling us what to do anymore. So it's kind of, we move from one thing to the other. So I think there is undoubtedly a place for advice in this moment of transition. You know, I remember the days of using coloured crayons on maps, and we've moved on significantly from that. And it is a much easier process. And all of the farmers I see online saying that they applied to SFI, it was a very straightforward process and they're familiar with it. But I still think there is understanding what options you would need to undertake based on your farming system, and is really key. And that's where advice is really important. So I have always asked for some sort of an accreditation of advice. So whether you want to go to your land agent, to your local environmental advisor, or you want to go to an ENGO for advice on your farm business, if there is a government kind of standard of advice that we expect, I think that would be really good. But I also see the opportunities that we want farmers to kind of learn themselves and learn. And you know, it's been around for, you know, stewardship, agri-environment, ESA, SFI, ELS, HLS, been around for 30 years. It's you know, so we know what most farmers are familiar with it. Most farmers at some stage have dipped their toe in the water, so they know what the expectations are. One of my biggest concerns and one of the shortcomings of this phenomenal transition in British agriculture is the lack of recognizing the changes that we've made through baselining. We've had 30 years of agri-environment. We're told we're one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, yet we've never really measured what we've done. So this wonderful opportunity with SFI, with stewardship, to actually baseline where we are before we have land use change or management change, to understand some of the gains, but also understand some things that haven't quite worked out, and how we can then, you know, there is flexibility within the schemes to change and to adapt. So if things don't work for your farm, or things aren't working for some of the natural capital assets on your holding, actually you can change those to make sure they do. So from my perspective, that's the big gap. And I have been speaking to many of Jonathan's colleagues to try and ensure that we get something that could be rolled out at a national level, where farmers could have the ability to baseline their farms for biodiversity, for water quality, for soil quality, for air quality, and then make changes to see the benefits. It would be a wonderful good news story, I think, that everyone would benefit from.
Thanks, Jake. And Jonathan, you look like you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, just a few points about sort of advisor support. I've never met an advisor that gives their advice for free. So it's a question. It's not a question. It might be free at point of service, but somewhere somebody's picking up the bill. And we just need to be conscious of that. In terms of a sort of industry standard qualification for this, what's really interesting is how the basis organisation is reacting to this change. First of all, they've got far more people requesting to do the basis plant protection courses and the FACS, the fertiliser stuff. I think some of that may be farmers looking at our payments to do those plans and saying, well, I'll just use that money and put myself through the course, which is, that's great. But they're also developing environmental modules to their suite of actions. They've had basis soil and water for a while, but they're also developing further modules. So I think the commercial advisory sector is responding to the change. Also, as part of the Farm and Countryside programme, we're supporting the establishment of the Institute for Agriculture and Horticulture tier, which is aimed at providing the mechanism for farmers to professionally develop and gain qualifications in a structured way. So, if you like, it's very crudely, it's the sort of, it's the basis, as basis is to advisors. We want tier to be that for farmers, to provide people with that opportunity for continual learning and development. So that's just what I wanted to say on the support, on the advisor support base point.
Yeah. Great, thank you so much. We're about halfway through the questions. We've not got to the questions from the Q&A yet, so we're going to in a moment do that. I just want one comment back on Jake's point, which is around the, tracking where we've come from. I think from a perspective of Land App, just for a moment, is what we're trying to promote is this digital transformation in the sector. I think at times there's been weaknesses in the paper-based system or just a spreadsheet system where there isn't a direct way of tracking where exactly an AB8 option was used on a farm from the last 5-10 years. And I think it's great to see this digital revolution that's happening across the sector, not just within Land App. And the more that we can do to work closer together on that, we had about 19,000 stewardship plans designed on Land App last year. Many of those are printed into a PDF and then handed to Defra as a piece of paper. Whereas actually, if we got that file held at a centralized level, we would then be able to start to evidence where those schemes are happening across the country in a bit more of a formal way. So first question is for Jonathan to just quickly explain just some timelines around the new scheme, the language of the new scheme. We've heard a couple of headings, combined offer, etc. And that's from Julie Tucker. Just wanted to know when in summer is the new scheme expected to roll out?
In the summer. So we'll be publishing more information, more guidance in the not too distant future. We will then, as we have done for the last few years, we will go through this process of what we call controlled rollout. So we will literally start with a handful of people, invite them to come in and try and break the IT, basically. We will learn from that, we will iterate, and then we'll broaden that out to a few hundred people, then a few thousand, and then we'll open the gates for everybody. And we're not doing that to be bloody awkward. We're doing that because history teaches us if we put a line in the sand and say this will open here, we end up making stuff available when it's not fit for purpose, and then it all goes horribly wrong and everybody loses out. Let's go back to when we opened up Countryside Stewardship mid-tier, etc., etc. So we're not, with no intention of repeating those past mistakes. So because we want everybody to have a great experience and we want this to work for everybody. Yeah, we're also looking to, well, just say in this space, we know we've got what the term we use is a confused delivery landscape at the moment. So at the moment, we've got SFI, we've got mid-tier, we've got higher tier, and some of those actions, slightly different versions of them appear in SFI and appear in mid-tier. So what we're also looking at is streamlining all of that so that it's a far more straightforward set of schemes to engage with, and that's all part of what we'll be rolling out this summer.
Just very quickly, that's no longer being called the combined offer. That's got a new name, or is it still being called the combined offer?
Well, we've been using the combined offer. Yeah, the terminology is consolidating around all of this. We're not at the moment publicising what that will be, because ultimately ministers make announcements, not officials like me.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. We will have our notifications turned on, ready for the update from Defra. So we've got a question from Rob Dumbrill, just around wood pasture, and I want to kind of widen that a little bit to agroforestry. I suppose question to Charlie firstly is, what type of options would you like to see in the future around agroforestry, wood pasture, and is the existing scheme enough, or are there things missing in that potential space?
Yeah, I mean, I think so far, so I've helped quite a few farmers apply for wood pasture creation and management within their higher tier schemes. Some of them, well, I know other farmers who haven't been able to apply for them because it doesn't quite meet the eligibility. So I think those kinds of options need to be broadened out. So, maybe you're not creating traditional wood pasture, but you're still planting trees within some kind of farming setting. So a broader agroforestry option. Obviously there are agroforestry actions coming forward in SFI with different payment rates. It'd be really useful to know what density of trees will relate to what payment rate. So I suppose from an advisor's perspective, it's quite difficult at the moment to, I feel like there's a lot of us kind of like sitting on our hands because we can't quite advise farmers on what to do because we don't quite know what they're going to look like. Certainly lots of opportunity. Yeah, I'm kind of just looking forward to hearing more information about it really before I can make too many comments.
Great, thank you. And Jonathan, any updates on the agroforestry that you can give us quickly?
Only that the level of detail that quite rightly has been asked for, that's what we're working up the publication material at the moment, and will be coming out in the not too distant future. I think what I'll just briefly say is, wood pasture, parkland, agroforestry, where does one stop and the other start? So wood pasture, in essence, we're managing the whole entirety of that parcel as wood pasture. We're managing the action is managing the grassland and the trees all together. Agroforestry is we're just interested in the trees. So what you're doing between those trees, you could be growing wheat, barley, you could have it down to pasture. Agroforestry is we're just paying for the trees. The reason we're doing agroforestry is in the past, and this was sort of enshrined in EU law, there was a definition of farmland and there was a definition of woodland, and never the twain shall meet. And lots of farmers may want, well, if we're going to get anywhere near our carbon targets, we need more trees in the farm landscape. But as they are finding in Wales, there can be a reluctance to creating new woodland because that land is devalued to some extent, and it's taking land out of production. With agroforestry is a middle way. It gives us a way to get more trees in the farm landscape, but allows food production to carry on around them. And that's the basic principles. There are different densities of agroforestry because if we go above, and it's roughly 100 stems per hectare, that's where we start legally creating woodland, and you get into environmental impact assessments and etc. etc. And that's right, but equally we want to make a simplified lower density actions available where they're not going to do any harm. Let's just give people the opportunity to go and do this.
Right, thank you. And I think not only continuing food production should be part of the science, I suppose, it's about how do we bolster and improve food production as well. You know, mitigating risk, reducing input costs, etc. And I think what agroforestry is bringing to the table is a lot of that. And I think that peer-to-peer learning is going to be very important. Just a question for Jake, and a bit of a provocative one, was around the difference between mid-tier and higher tier. There's clearly a lot more options available in the higher tier, but some of them don't seem fit. So do you believe the mid-tier, higher tier split makes sense? I.e., the question asked from Anonymous around, you know, veteran tree management and bird boxes, for example, that are only available in the higher tier. Should some of them be made available to more people? And is it, you know, kind of just entrenching a bit more of a, you know, a difference between those larger estates having access to, you know, higher tier versus the smaller farms that perhaps don't have the time or the capacity to go into that higher tier?
My personal opinion, as we see this rolled out, and seeing all of the challenges of food security and self-sufficiency, and having a scheme that is SFI, which is broad and shallow, essentially, and concentrates as much on food as it does the wider environment, I'm of the belief that we should have something called Countryside Stewardship Premium, which actually delivers on specific outcomes totally dedicated to the natural environment, rather than because so much is available under SFI, there are so many options, there's so many crossover between SFI and mid-tier. Surely, instead of having sort of 3 levels within, you know, SFI, mid-tier, higher tier, we just have Stewardship Premium, or I think Secretary of State or Minister called it Stewardship Plus. Actually, that is something totally geared to nature's recovery, protecting our watercourses, and enhancing nature. Rather than, and that shouldn't be exclusive to large land holdings, and should be open to all small holdings. And there is one question about how you identify where you put these options in, and that's actually, you know, look at where, you know, every farmer knows their land intimately well. They know where they produce food and where they don't. They know where it's too wet, where it's too dry, where it's grazed by rabbits, or where it's just unfeasible to economically produce food. And those are the parcels, and those are the areas that we want to target under Stewardship Premium, as I see it, because, you know, if we look at the Lawton report and making space for nature, we need, within our found landscapes, we need the stepping stones within our landscapes to join the core areas of high value nature. And the SFI options are more the veins that interconnect them. So it's identifying on your farm, you know, many farmers will have yield mappings and will be able to know where they are less productive areas. And targeting those areas specifically for long-term land that sits in nature's recovery for more than a period of an agreement for 3 to 5 years, but actually might be in there for 5 or 10 years, because then that's when we start to see real meaningful gains. And all the challenges that we have of meeting 30 by 30 and halting species decline and reversing species decline, we're not going to do that where we can drop in and out of schemes that are relatively for short periods.
Completely agree, Jake. And I think Defra has already set quite a nice precedent for itself through the England Woodland Creation Offer. The way that they are strategically promoting woodlands via additional contribution payments could actually start underpinning a Countryside Stewardship Plus type mechanism, particularly as a way of delivering local nature recovery strategies. You know, there are local authorities saying locally where they want to see certain habitat happen. I think there's a massive opportunity, and we'd love to speak about it further, perhaps another time, is location of the thing could promote, you know, putting the right wildflower in the right place where it's south facing, connecting existing species rich grasslands, etc. And I think the precedent's been set. Charlie, I wanted to come to you. Just Jake kind of touched on that question: is how do you decide which option goes where? How do you, I suppose, prioritize locations for your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a bit of a process. Looking at what's there. I mean, the first step is obviously always to look at magic maps and land app and to see what habitats are already there or in the local area. And then really it's talking to the farmer, engaging what it is that they want to deliver, and what is going to fit within their farming system. Areas of land, as Jake says, that are less productive, that are more obvious to remove from agricultural production, but also having in the back of my mind some of the sort of more targeted species in that area. So, you know, in North Norfolk, it might be lapwing clots or something, which are hard to sell to some farmers because it's taking a larger area out from the middle of a nice big arable field that doesn't have any obstacles in. So it's a bit of a negotiation. It's a bit of I sort of come up with a plan that says, you know, this would be brilliant if you could do X, Y, and Z, and then we have to make it work with what the farmer is able and willing to do, because I'd rather the farmer does a little bit less but does it really well than puts everything in and actually makes a muddle of it because they don't quite understand what the option is trying to deliver or whatever. So I think it's really worth tapping into what the farmer is passionate about. And that's actually why I'm really pleased to see the SFI going into the direction of being able to add more options in every year, because what you often see is a farmer that has applied for a load of options and it's probably a really brilliant scheme, but in that first year the workload is absolutely huge. And if you have a year like this year where it doesn't stop raining, or maybe there's a drought in the summer, it really squeezes the time that those options can be established, and you end up with poorly established options that aren't delivering what you want them to deliver. So now the opportunity for farmers to put in maybe 30% of what they want to achieve in the long run in the first year, and then slowly bolt on more each year, I just think is going to deliver so much more in terms of quality habitats.
Yeah, I think that inertia that's caused by being nervous about not knowing what's happening next year has been a bit of a blocker to some people. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah.
We've got 15 minutes left and we've got about 35 questions still to answer. So I'm going to just ask the panelists to keep their answers slightly shorter, and we're going to try and rattle through them if that's okay. So just a question for Jonathan. If you're in an existing HLS scheme, will that reduce your chance or limit your access to other future schemes?
Yeah. In short, we can't pay for the same activity twice on the same piece of land. Also, that is that the IT is a little bit clunky around all of that. When it comes to HLS, it's a lot more efficient in the SFI and stewardship. It's something we're very conscious of, and we're working very hard behind the scenes to remove those barriers.
Thanks, Jonathan. And just a very quick one from Lois Phillips saying, do you think the Department of Education has a role in helping upskill the future of advisors?
Yes. My youngest son is at agricultural college at the moment, and it's quite alarming. They're sort of 30 years behind. I'll say no more.
Yeah. Open questions to the panel. I'm not sure who wants to ask this. From Robert Clark. What's your views on peat restoration at a small farm scale? And can Jonathan outline how this will be supported under SFI? So small scale peat restoration rather than the large scale projects that they're focusing on.
We talk just very quickly. We've significantly increased the payment rates for restoring lowland peat in a sort of pump drainage system. Scale there's not really an issue. Because we're raising the water tables to a very high level, that may impact neighbours, so we're envisaging there needs to be some collaboration around all of that. Equally, in a moorland situation, the payment rates for re-wetting peat, I think, have gone up from £15 a hectare or £20 a hectare to 181. Usually bigger scale projects because it's a moorland situation, but sizes should not be a barrier.
Okay, thank you. Charlie, do you agree with that? Are you doing any smaller scale peatland restoration type projects, or is that not in your wheelhouse?
Not really any peatland restoration projects on a smaller scale, but do work with farmers on a smaller scale that might have some marshland or something. Yeah, I think probably for those people, access to free advice from Natural England or your other specialists is really key in those situations.
Yeah, thanks. Got a question from the director of the Arran to Ada Farm Cluster, who hasn't left their name. I think it might be Caroline. Just around shine mapping, less of a question. We know obviously a lot of stewardship agreements get blocked by shine features, but access to that data has been quite difficult. Just more of an announcement that Landap and Historic England have been working behind the scenes to get access to shine features on behalf of farmers using their SBI number, and that will hopefully be out over the next month or two, provided we can get the license in place with all the correct local authorities. But we are working on it, so watch this space. Jonathan, do you think there's enough checks and balances to ensure decent delivery of what is being paid by the taxpayer? Is it value for money? Question mark.
Well, value for money it's a very fair question, and we learn lessons, we iterate. You know, those of you that saw SFI 22 and how we iterated and pivoted to the approach we've got with SFI 23. We monitor the actions. If there are, let's just use the term loopholes, if we think they're significant, then we will act to close those sorts of loopholes. Ultimately, we cannot make the mistake we did with ELS, where we got uptake, but it was difficult to justify the value for money. We're very conscious of that, and we want SFI to deliver both really high uptake, but real value for money for the taxpayer.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Question two, I suppose, Charlie, probably one for you. Do you know if the Facilitation Fund meetings can pay for SFI as well as stewardship, or are they just the time can only be used for stewardship?
Well, traditionally, the Facilitation Fund has only been able to use the time to advise on a one-to-many approach. So there's not been any funding available for for specific countryside stewardship or SFI agreements for a farm within your group. I think with the most recent round of the Facilitation Fund that might have changed, but in the agreement that we have on the North Norfolk Coastal Group, it's still one-to-many advice, which I get, but I think yeah, if the Facilitation Fund can pay for actual one-to-one advice for that specific farm, we will see better outcomes from those cluster groups.
Yeah, Jonathan, is there anything to add on to that, or in terms of the expansion of the one-to-many to one-to-one?
We're learning lessons from the current approach for the facilitator group, so we're looking to improve it.
Great, thank you. So a question from Michael Payne. There doesn't appear to be common standards for soil analytics and soil calculators to use, and the result seems to mean that depending on who's using it, different results are received. Is there any appetite or progress from Defra about setting standards and standardizing soil sampling, soil analytics? I suppose probably in relation to the SFI actions.
Short answer is no, not at this point. The key thing we want at this point in time with the soil stuff is for farmers to develop their own understanding and their own knowledge about their soils. Everybody is adamant that we need to have a set of standards. The next thing is everybody's adamant that their version of the standard is. So at this point in time, we just want farmers to better understand their soils, what it's telling them, and to be able and understand that there's a difference. The different approaches, for example, for testing soil organic matter, will give a different result. So only compare like with like.
Yeah, we've also been speaking, about how do we help support as Landap soil sampling, and we've got some ideas, but we've always, as an organisation, waited for government to make the first move rather than coming up with our own metrics. So the more consistency we can get in the sector, I think the more benefit it's going to be for all. Sorry, Jonathan, I'm coming back to you, and I've had this personal experience as well, is why is there a need for HRW3, so the hedgerow management option in SFI, to have 50% in one parcel and 50% in the other? Is there a more simple way of calculating the lengths? And I think it's to do with when you're applying, you have to put 50% in one parcel and 50% the other on the application form, although you've got 100% length to manage.
Yeah, we know it's not ideal. The issue we've got in splitting the hedgerow actions side by side is where you've got boundary hedgerows. RPA are quite rightly nervous of both people claiming for the same hedge.
Makes sense. Yeah, we as a mapping company, we've been trying to help people map HRW3, and it's a bit of a pain at the moment. Question for Jake. Do you have any concerns about the impact on food production with all these schemes coming out and the uptake of acreage?
No, I don't. If I'm honest, there are lots of concerns, and we hear it on all sorts of platforms that farmers being paid to grow flowers and opting out of food production. And I think the reality that I see with farmers and growers, actually, if they look at their past investments in machinery and technology in growing food, it would be complete madness to throw away those investments in short-term gains for growing flowers under existing government schemes. So I think there will be some farmers that will have to seriously consider their past business model. We look at contract farming. I had a farmer approach me recently who's in the east of England with 200 acres, contract farming, and the contract farmer said it's not worth me farming your land. So there are options where those might change, but actually generally we will continue to see the vast majority of farmers continue to grow food in a more sustainable manner, sitting alongside high value nature.
Yeah, completely agree. And I'm not sure if Charlie, you've got anything to add to that. Would you agree with Jake?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of news around, such and such farmer put in their whole farm down to AB8 or whatever. And yeah, that's happening, but it's happening on such a small percentage of farms that I don't see it being a threat. And I completely agree with Jake and what he's just said about investment and jobs and all that kind of stuff. And actually, I see it the other way around, that these options are building resilience in farm businesses. There's farms across the country that are struggling for break crops, and it's causing massive problems in the rotation. So actually, if they can make the use of a herbal ley or a legume fallow or a summer cover crop or anything like that, it's building diversity into their rotation, which is only going to be a good thing.
Agree. On the other side of the spectrum, though, there are landowners out there that are interested in things like rewilding. So I've got a question here from Anonymous that says, obviously, larger rewilding sites such as NEP have accessed grants. Are there going to be grants available to small holdings if they would like to consider rewilding?
So,
Jonathan, sorry.
So the ELM scheme is made up of 3 parts: SFI, which we've been talking about, Countryside Stewardship that we've been talking about, and then landscape recovery. Landscape recovery is looking for those big transformable, that's not the right word, but you know what I mean, across quite big areas. That's not constrained to big estates. The vast majority of the landscape recovery agreements we've got are groups of farmers coming together with a shared vision for their area. So it's not fair to say that those types of schemes are only accessible to the big estates.
Jake, did you come in?
Yeah, just if you want to have a very extensive management of the land you own, look at the options and actually think outside of the box. So we've talked about the wood pasture. There are new options with rotational scrub. Actually look at that, and you can do that at relatively small scale. That can be on a parcel by parcel basis. So it is undoubtedly not exclusively available to large estates or those within landscape recovery. There are only 55 landscape recovery pilots currently, but actually there's no reason why smaller businesses can't opt for more extensive land use change that they feel suits them.
Thanks, Jake. So we've got 4 minutes left. I'm just going to cherry pick some. Any questions that we don't manage to answer, I will pass around the panelists afterwards and we'll try and get some answers typed out for you. Thank you so much for all your engagement. Jonathan, will there be any options in SFI for semi-improved grassland?
Yes, it's in at the moment. It's low, no input grassland. So the £151 a hectare.
Great, already in. Do you find, I suppose more for Charlie, do you find that people know their profitability down to a field level to be able to make business decisions about agri-environment, or is there not enough information out there? From Ross Dawson, that is.
Total mix. Yeah, some people have invested in farm management software, whatever, which makes that kind of thing much easier. But there are a lot of farmers that are still not completely across their costs and what their gross margins of their crops are. So actually, maybe that's a really important point, and there needs to be some kind of support out there to help farmers with that. I mean, there's the Farm Resilience Fund and Farm Resilience Programme that is aimed at increasing awareness and knowledge around the sort of business elements. So I think that's really important, because then you can then pick the options which are going to make you more money.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask everyone one final question just to round off, rather than go through any more Q&A. And like I said, I will get through these and share it around with all the attendees. I just want to ask all the panelists, what are you most looking forward to with the new agri-environment schemes? And just one, I suppose, a sentence each, starting with you, Jonathan.
In 5 years' time, driving through the countryside or a train journey through the countryside and seeing the difference.
Thank you. Jake?
In 2 years' time, driving through the countryside on a train, seeing a difference. If I look at 15,000 SFI applications going live, they will start to implement those change in the next 12 months, and we will see the change. Already, I've seen just the voluntary uptake of the benefits of cash crops and cover crops that I have seen in Norfolk over the last 5 years has now been rewarded, and we will only see that accelerate. Driving through the Fiennes, which I do periodically, there's livestock there that wasn't there 20 years ago. There might have been livestock there 50 years ago. They've now brought it back. So the landscape, the farm landscape, is changing in a positive way.
Thanks, Jake. And Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, same for me, really. I'm really excited to see some of the regenerative farming approaches being brought into the scheme. It's brilliant that we've had payment for managing the edges of fields, but now managing how we actually produce our food is so vital, and I'm really pleased with that. And the new payment rate for hedge planting, we're seeing hedges being planted all over the place, which is brilliant.
Great. Thank you all so much. I think it just leaves me to say thank you to all of our panelists. We are 1 minute till the end of our time. I think what I've taken away from this is a huge amount, a lot of optimism, but clearly what's being said is, although there's not been clear communication from Defra at the moment, it's still important to start planning ready for the application window to open. So please do not use between now and June as a relaxation period. This is the time where you should be thinking about planning, and we are here to help both advisors, Defra, tools like Land App. One final plug from us is we've released a Countryside Stewardship validator in the Land App. So if you draw your Countryside Stewardship in the Land App, we can now let you know if you've made any errors. You put it on his, on designations, ineligible options, etc. So please have a play with that. And I think my final slide just says, thank you all so much for your time. The recording will be shared, and enjoy your weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.